A lab in Switzerland just watched a piece of human tissue shed and rebuild itself in a dish, a full menstrual cycle outside the body. Apple sold out of Mac Minis because people are buying second computers, small headless screen-free machines to host the AI agents working on their behalf. And a House subcommittee voted to thin the federal basic science budget by a fifth in a single year, while Japan, the UK, China, and the EU are pouring capital into the same layer in the opposite direction. It's May 1st. Let's get into it. I want to start with the organoid story because this one is genuinely extraordinary and very few people are actually leading with it. The endometrium, which is the lining of the uterus, is one of the strangest tissues in the human body. It rebuilds itself every month through a woman's reproductive life, and it does so without scarring. Most tissue, when it's damaged and regrows, it leaves a scar. The endometrium doesn't. How it manages that has been a long-standing mystery in regenerative biology, and the reason it's been a mystery is mostly logistical. You can't watch it happen. The process is too invasive to observe inside a living person. Primate models gave clues but not answers, so the tissue had to be studied from the outside through hormonal markers and indirect signals because the inside simply wasn't accessible. But researchers at the Friedrich Miescher Institute changed that. They built an organoid, a small, self-organizing piece of tissue grown in a dish using just the epithelial cells of the endometrium. They ran the hormone sequence of a menstrual cycle through it. They mechanically broke the tissue down to simulate the shedding, and they watched it regenerate. This is published in Cell Stem Cell, and here's the surprise. The cells driving regeneration weren't the deep stem cells that everyone assumed were doing the work. It was the surface luminal cells, the ones at the top of the tissue, the ones that help embryos implant during pregnancy. The textbook model had it backwards. Now slow down on what this actually means. The endometrium is one of the only human tissues that regenerates without scarring. Wound healing, fibrosis, tissue engineering, entire fields of medicine are built around the question of why most tissue scars, but this one doesn't. The answer was inaccessible because the system couldn't be observed, but now it can. The organoid is cheap, it's simple, it can be replicated in any lab with standard culture equipment. The research substrate that was unavailable to the entire field just last week is available to thousands of labs this week. That's the diffusion pattern that compounds. A capability that requires a uterus, a primate, or an invasive procedure now requires just a dish and a hormone sequence. What this means: a mechanism hidden for the entire history of medicine is now observable on a benchtop. The therapeutic class that builds on this for burns, for surgical scarring, for fibrotic disease, for reproductive medicine will be defined over the coming decade by which labs can iterate fastest on the new substrate. The capability now exists. So what comes next is the kind of work that's going to be building on it. And that's exactly the kind of work that NSF and NIH funding has historically enabled, which brings me to the next story. The House Appropriations Subcommittee voted yesterday to cut the National Science Foundation's budget by 20% for fiscal 2027, down to $7 billion from $8.8 billion. The NASA Science Directorate took a 17% cut on top of that. Now, the headline framing in most outlets is that this is a victory because the administration had proposed a 55% cut and the subcommittee rejected it. So I want to push past that framing, though, because the arithmetic is doing something that the headlines aren't catching. A 20% single-year reduction at the agency that funds about a quarter of all U.S. basic research is the largest single-year cut to American basic science in modern memory. And no surprise that it comes from this administration. And the body of work being defunded is exactly the body of work that produced everything that we now treat as the AI and biotech surge. AlphaFold, the protein structure prediction system that's reshaping drug discovery, was built on decades of NSF-funded crystallography. The transformer architecture that underlies every frontier AI model came out of NSF-funded computer science. The geothermal drilling techniques that Fervo just IPO'd, as we covered here on the Century Report, came out of NSF and DOE geomechanics work from the 1990s and 2000s. The basic science layer is the layer everything else compounds on top of, and it's the layer being thinned. So here's the thing about basic science cuts. They don't show up next year. They don't even show up in 5 years. They show up in 2035, 2040, when the deployment cycle that would have been fed by the research being done today doesn't have anything to deploy. The cuts compound by appearing not to compound, which is exactly why they're being made now, because the cost is invisible until it's structural, and the current administration frankly doesn't care. Now, the surface read is, American basic science is in trouble, and that's true, but there's a deeper reading that the same evidence also supports. The work that produced AlphaFold, the Transformer, and Fervo's drilling didn't require a 2026 grant. It required the funding environment of 1995 to 2015, which has already executed and is now flowing through deployment. What's forming today in the same window as the US is thinning its basic science layer is a multipolar research substrate. The UK is courting Anthropic, as we've talked about. Japan committed $16.3 billion to Rapidus. China crossed 5 terawatts of installed solar. The EU is engineering sovereign AI mergers. The Aferis Federated Pharma Data Network is pooling proprietary research across 5 different drug companies. Open weight models are distributing capability access faster than any single funder can gate it. The decade-out capability gap one jurisdiction creates is now being closed in the same quarter often by jurisdictions reading the calendar in the opposite direction. The basic science layer is becoming geographically distributed in a way that the post-World War II funding architecture never contemplated. Now, there's a deeper look at this in today's edition of the Century Report if you want to really follow the thread. All right, let's move on. This one's actually fun, and it tells you something about where computing is actually heading. Tim Cook said on Apple's earnings call yesterday that the Mac Mini will be supply constrained for several months. On its surface, that's just a routine inventory note, but what's actually happening is one of the more interesting consumer hardware shifts in years. OpenClaw users, people running the open source agentic AI system that released several months ago and kind of took the world by storm, have come to assume over the past few months that Mac Mini is the right machine to host an agent locally. It's powerful enough for inference, it's compact enough to dedicate to background tasks, and this is the big part, isolated from the user's primary computer in a way that really matters when you've got an autonomous system taking actions on your behalf. So people are buying second computers, small, headless, which means screen-free, dedicated machines to host the agent. The MacBook is for the human. The Mac Mini is for the agent that the human deployed. So a machine that starts around $600 and of course just goes up from there is now sufficient substrate to host an autonomous agent. 2 years ago, that capability required either very expensive cloud subscriptions scaling with usage or a workstation an order of magnitude more expensive. The capability that was gated behind hyperscaler API access back in 2024 is running locally on consumer hardware in 2026, with the user owning the inference rather than renting it by the token. Now, you hear a lot of coverage right now about Anthropic raising at $900 billion and OpenAI at $852 billion, and the trillion-dollar concentration of compute at the frontier. That's all real. But the Mac Mini selling out is the same trajectory read from the other side. Capability access is widening at the consumer endpoint at the same time that capability concentration is intensifying at the frontier. Both of these things are happening. Most coverage just shows you the one. The floor of agentic AI ownership just dropped into reach of small business, independent developers, and individual users. That's the diffusion pattern. So the next time you open your laptop and wonder whether you should be working with an agent, the hardware to host one yourself locally without paying anyone per query costs less than a decent phone. All right, 2 more stories before we close, and they go together in a way that I want to walk through very carefully. Spotify rolled out a Verified by Spotify badge yesterday. It distinguishes human artists from AI-generated profiles. The criteria are very specific: sustained listener engagement, platform rule compliance, and, quote, signs of genuine presence both on and off the platform, close that quote. Concert dates, merchandise, linked social accounts. Profiles primarily representing AI-generated music are explicitly ineligible. And why now? Because Deezer reported last week that 44% of new music uploads are AI-generated. We covered that here. That's about 75,000 tracks a day. And 97% of listeners cannot distinguish AI music from human-made music in blind listening. 97%. A lot of coverage is showing this as a threat to human artists. But the same finding, read forward, shows something different. The value listeners attach to human authorship is becoming a deliberate choice rather than a default inference from audio quality. That choice is the new market signal. Concert dates, merchandise, a human you can follow off-platform. That's the operational definition of an artist whose work carries the provenance you can trace back to a person. The category human-made music is being commercially constituted in real time at platform speed, not legislative speed. And here's the harder story, though. 3 women in Arizona filed suit yesterday, alleging that 3 men used their photos to train AI influencer models without consent, generated AI-modified imagery, sold that imagery on a subscription platform, and then sold a $24.95 a month course on separate platforms, teaching others how to do the same thing. The structural detail buried in the complaint is the targeting instruction. The defendants allegedly told subscribers to choose women with under 50,000 followers, specifically women whose social and economic resources, the suit alleges, would be insufficient to mount a legal response. Now, these are allegations. They have not yet been proven, but the architecture that they describe is what I really want you to see clearly, because a business model built specifically around the asymmetry of legal recourse is a big deal right now. The victims chosen because they're least able to push back. A course sold on top of the underlying business, teaching others to do the same, a tutorial layer on a harm that's been industrialized. The Take It Down Act, which was signed last May, criminalizes non-consensual sexualized AI imagery. The Arizona case tests something the law hasn't been tested on yet: whether teaching the technique, selling the playbook, is itself actionable. The plaintiffs aren't just pursuing the photos, they're pursuing the courses. And this really is important for the trajectory, more than it might seem, because the Spotify badge and the Arizona lawsuit are both structurally the same kind of event. A private actor or a private litigant writing operational rules in a domain where public law has not arrived yet. Spotify is constituting the category human artist by commercial fiat. The Arizona plaintiffs, if they prevail, are constituting the category AI-enabled identity harm with a teachable business model by private litigation. In both cases, the operational layer is moving faster than the formal one. The badge will, in practice, do more to shape the synthetic music market in the next 18 months than any FTC or Copyright Office ruling. The Arizona case will, if it succeeds, establish private litigation as the actual governance layer for AI identity harm, at least until public law catches up. And the public law that eventually does arrive will be written downstream of these cases, not upstream. Let's do a quick rundown of what landed yesterday. XAI launched custom voices and a voice library, voice cloning from short recordings managed through their console. They also released Grok 4.3 to the API. OpenAI introduced advanced account security for ChatGPT and Codex. This is phishing-resistant login, stronger recovery, account takeover protection. That's a tell about who's trying to break into developer accounts right now. Goodfire released Silico, which is a mechanistic interpretability platform for debugging models during training. Microsoft shipped a legal agent in Microsoft Word for contract review and clause-by-clause edits. Clink launched what they're calling the world's first fiat agentic payment skill, meaning that AI agents can now pay merchants directly with user-defined card limits. That is a new layer of the agentic stack going live in production. And NVIDIA released a TensorRT plugin for the Unreal Engine, which puts RTX-optimized AI inference directly inside the game engine. Okay, let's close out. Here's what today's evidence is actually showing you. A piece of human tissue rebuilt itself in a dish, and a research substrate that was unavailable to the entire field of regenerative biology last week is available to thousands of labs this week. A consumer machine that cost $600 is now enough to host an AI agent that 2 years ago required hyperscaler API access. A streaming platform constituted a new commercial category, verified human artist at platform speed, while public law is still describing the world before AI-generated music existed. 3 women in Arizona are testing whether existing law reaches a business architecture that didn't exist when the law was written. The frame most coverage is using right now is concentration. Who is locking in compute? Who's hitting which valuation? Whose budget is getting cut? All that framing is real and important, but it's also missing the other half of what's in the same evidence. The basic science layer is becoming geographically distributed faster than any one jurisdiction can gate it. The agentic AI substrate is widening from data centers down to a small box on your desk. Regenerative biology just got a benchtop tool that costs almost nothing to replicate. A streaming platform's badge and an Arizona courtroom are constituting governance at a cadence the legislative branch cannot match, and the rules they're writing will travel. The story underneath today's headlines is that the things institutions used to do, fund the basic science, gate the compute, define the categories, write the rules, are being done by other actors, on other surfaces, at other cadences. The badge, the bench, the lawsuit, the $600 machine, each one is a place where the operational layer is forming faster than the formal one, where access is widening at the same time that concentration intensifies somewhere else. The endometrium rebuilds itself by recruiting the cells at the surface, the ones nobody expected to do the work. That turns out to be how a lot of things heal. We'll see you tomorrow.